Should we talk first of all then about Putin's public statements yesterday as he launched this clearly highly orchestrated invasion of the Donbass with more nuclear threats? Is this saber rattling, or do we have to take this extremely seriously, do you think?
Well, I think if we remember that the Russian foreign minister said right up to the day of the invasion that Russia had no intention of invading, the worry now is that he said yesterday that Russia has no intention of using nuclear weapons. And so you wonder whether this is reassurance or actually a threat, much more likely. Because the problem for the Russians is that even though they have reinforced their army on the ground, they brought up much more artillery power and also air power, they still haven't been able to achieve a decisive breakthrough. The resistance of the Ukrainians is very dogged, and the danger might be that the Russians, Putin himself, will decide, in order to break this deadlock, I should simply use a tactical nuclear weapon, which might only destroy, say, a square mile or so, but it would be a break of the taboo by a major power of using weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear weapons, which we haven't seen used since August 1945.
OK, we're talking about a 300-mile front line in the Donbass, a completely different scenario for the Ukrainian resistance to deal with. How do you think that they are going to cope with this new threat? Lots of support being pledged from the West, notably not from Italy or from Germany, though. Are there cracks appearing in that alliance, or do you think Ukraine has the support it needs to react to this new threat?
Well, everybody pays lip service to the idea of helping Ukraine, and a lot of countries, Britain particularly, have been supplying weapons that are very useful against Russian armoured columns, as we saw back at the end of February and March when they tried to attack Kiev itself. The problem today is that this is a much bigger battle. The Ukrainians are using what the Americans say is roughly a week's supply of ammunition and anti-tank weapons in 3 days. So, in other words, the stockpiles are depleting very rapidly, and the Russians have an enormous stockpile of standard ammunition, artillery shells, rockets, and so on. So unless the West steps up its delivery of weapons to Ukraine, the risk will be, however brave, however determined the Ukrainian soldiers are to resist, they will simply be swamped by firepower. That's one of the reasons why the Russians have been striking deep into Ukraine to try and block the supply routes coming from Europe, coming from the NATO countries, and to disrupt the ability of the Ukrainian army to re-equip itself. And so really the next 2 days will be pretty decisive. If the Russians can both tie down the Ukrainian army with heavy artillery fire so it can't maneuver to fight them, and at the same time can gain some maneuverability itself, and stop Western resupply, or at least limit it to the point that the Ukrainians are using more ammunition than they're getting, then Putin might have a hope of winning the war quickly. That said, his hopes have clearly been dashed for a quick victory. He expected it to be 4 or 5 days, perhaps, in February. Now we are in the middle, towards the end of April. And the more this fighting goes on, the more Russians themselves must begin to question, including Russian soldiers, is this a war that we should be fighting? Is it a strategy that is actually working